Now, if you're an engineer, a planner, a marketer, or a management type in an automotive company, your first goal is to create and produce a successful product. But that success often comes with its own drawbacks. For instance, take Hyundai. The Creta has been one of the most successful Hyundai products of recent times. In fact, in just over 5 years, they've managed to sell over 5 lakh units of the Creta in India and exported a lot of them too. But with that success of the Creta comes drawbacks. And the main drawback they've seen is that their brand, the brand from the same Hyundai group, Kia, has come out with their biggest competitor in India, the Seltos. Now, both the Creta and the Seltos have been smash hits in the Indian market. But with the second generation Creta out now, we are comparing it directly with the Seltos. You know, they're natural competitors. They're based on the same platform. In fact, they share pretty much all of the running gear. They share the 3 same engines. They share 4 kinds of different gearboxes. And underneath the skin, underneath the different styling, they're pretty much the same car. So for a customer, that's an incredibly difficult choice to make. Do I pick the Creta or do I pick the Seltos, considering that underneath the fancy looks, they're essentially the same product? Well, that's what we're going to try and do today. We're going to drive both of them. I've driven multiple versions of both the cars, of course, and try and give you an informed opinion of which of the two would be the best choice for you. Now, when you consider the factor that the Creta and the Seltos share the same platform, the engines, most of the gearboxes, even their trim levels are very close. In fact, the price difference between the Creta and the Seltos is so small, it's hardly even a figure in the larger scheme of things. So what is going to be the biggest factor that will change, or rather that will make people choose one of the two? Design, of course. Now, if I didn't tell you that the Creta and the Seltos was based on the same platform, you would never know, because they look completely opposite of each other. The new Creta in this case comes with the familiar family face that we've seen on the Venue's SUV before. So you get this big grille right here, you get these 3-layered headlamp setup. In the Creta, on the top model diesel that we are driving today, it has LED headlights, LED taillights, the works. You get 17-inch alloys, and one of the things about the new Creta's design is that it's quite polarizing in opinion. You know, it's a design that people either absolutely love or they absolutely dislike, and that's something that makes the Creta stand out on the road. I quite like some of the darker colors that are offered, and I think the Creta, in my opinion, looks much better in a darker color than, say, a white or a silver. Another major change that Hyundai designers have made to the Creta's design: the earlier Creta was slightly slab-sided, sharp creases and angles. In this one, they've changed that profile. The car is now slightly more rounded. They've also taken the sort of floating roof concept a little bit beyond. You see the black A-pillar, and they've given it this additional silver stripe. Now, in some colors that works quite well. It's also dependent on which version you have. It's not available on all versions, but for me, I think that's a little too much going on there. The rear haunch is interesting because it gives the Creta a very distinct design language, and I would say the most polarizing aspect of the Creta would have to be the rear end. This is a tail light treatment I don't know if I've seen before. I probably haven't, but like the front, this is also layered in 3 sort of phases or 3 steps. In fact, 4 if you count the reversing light there, 4 steps, and it's something that maybe we'll get used to over time. Maybe it's a personal preference. I'm not a big fan though. What I do like is the new big badging, because that seems to be catching up. We've seen that with the new Hyundai cars, we've seen that with the Neos, with the Aura, now with the Creta. I quite like the tail light, sort of the third tail light braking light integrated there, and from that perspective, if you're looking to make a statement, if you're actually looking to sort of get a car that looks nothing else like nothing else on the road, the Creta makes a lot of sense, but I don't think the design is for everybody. Now, the rear end of the Seltos, in contrast, is something that's quite traditional but still has a very distinct identity. You see this big chrome highlights that you get in the Seltos, that stands out. So do the uniquely shaped tail lights. These are also LED, and the whole design language of the Seltos that way is slightly more traditional, but it's very different to anything else we see on the road. To put it in a very often used cliche, it's a very Kia style of design language. But I find little to criticize with the Seltos' design, especially if you're used to a sort of more conventional kind of SUV or car design. You'll find the Seltos a lot less offensive, a lot more pleasing. So I think that would be a big draw to a lot of customers, that they stick to the tried and tested design, whereas the Creta is a lot more edgier, a lot more for people who are looking to experiment. Some of the more favorite parts of the Seltos' design for me have been those grey and red highlights that come as part of this GTX pack. You can see it on the wheels, you can see the door trims there. Big auto badging, maybe I'm not that big a fan of, but for me the most attractive angle of the Seltos has to be the front. That whole knurled aluminum style of finish, that very large LED headlight cluster, those very attractive indicators, ice cube fog lamps. I think from a traditional point of view, the Seltos is still a great looking car. So ultimately for me, when it comes to the design exterior wise, it boils down to two very simple perspectives. If you're looking for something that's slightly more conventional, stylish yet conventional, then the Seltos is probably your best bet. But on the other hand, if you're somebody who looks at design in a very edgy form, in a very experimental form, in a form that makes you stand out, then I think the Creta takes the cake. Now when it comes to the interior design of the Seltos, I have to say, when it was launched last year, this was by far the segment leading interior in the industry. It's fantastically well trimmed, the quality feels really good, the seats are highly comfortable, and I love that, you know, the version that we're seeing here, the GTX Plus diesel top model automatic, has this two-tone leather inside the car, but they also have a fantastic GTX version which has a full black leather interior with red detailing. That looks absolutely fantastic and is my absolute favorite. The other thing that Seltos also did was, you know, sort of change the game when it came to standard equipment. So what you see on the Seltos, well, it's loaded to the gills with equipment. You get Bose audio, you get ventilated front seats, you get a 10.25-inch touchscreen, multimedia system, climate control, cruise control, automatic headlights. You even get a heads-up display which is not present on the Creta, but honestly, without navigation being sort of transmitted to the heads-up display, it only shows the speed that you're doing, and while with the new speed cameras in, that's a good thing. The sort of practicality is a bit limited. The space also of the two cars is near identical. You have to remember they share almost the same wheelbase. They're almost the same length. In fact, I think the difference between the length of the two cars is about 15 mm, which is next to nothing. So from that perspective, the Seltos has a really attractive interior. Lots of gloss black plastic and matte black plastic and this matte aluminum finish that works quite well. There are a few things that the Seltos offers which the Creta doesn't have. What the Creta offers, I'll come to afterwards, is that one, the Seltos also has a front parking camera which allows it to give you a 360-degree view of the car when reversing or when parking, and that's a great addition, especially in our increasingly congested cities where you're trying to find a parking spot in a tough situation. And the Seltos also offers one segment, you know, even industry leading feature, because this is a feature which I think would be a great addition to any car in India, which is a blind spot camera. What does that do? Well, the minute you switch on the indicator, you indicate to turn to any direction, left or right, the multi-information display in front of the driver transmits a view from that lane right in front of you, takes away the blind spot. So right as you are about to turn, you're aware of if there's any vehicle or a pedestrian or an animal or a bicycle or anything that's next to you on both sides. It's a great addition which the Creta misses out on, and I think not just the Creta but any vehicle sold in India would be better if this was equipped on it. Now my first impression of when I get inside the Creta is that it looks quite conventional, and you know, that's an opposite sort of reaction to how I felt when I saw the exterior of the Creta, because that's quite edgy, that's pushing boundaries. Inside it's very conventional, and if you've been used to Hyundai cars, that's something you'll find very comforting. And you know, that's odd, because the Seltos looks a bit conventional on the outside and is quite edgy and modern and sort of futuristic inside. Creta, the exact opposite, really edgy on the outside, really conventional inside. The first impression I get of the interior, well, it's built quite well. The quality standards are as good as the Seltos. The switches, the way the door closes, the way everything functions feels really, really good. That 10.25-inch touchscreen multimedia display here has, you know, it works perfectly. It's quite well insulated from sunlight. You know, a lot of screens can fade out when there's lots of sunlight, not in this case. I quite like these vent designs. They are quite unique and they look quite good. The one thing that I don't like is the steering wheel. It's quite small, it feels quite nice to touch, but the design, it looks a little odd, and I think it's a little too thick. A slightly thinner steering wheel would be quite nice. Of course, there are a few features which the competition doesn't offer. I mean, it won't be a Hyundai product if that is not the case. And for most buyers, the biggest thing is going to be the panoramic sunroof. The Creta is the first car in its segment to be offering that bigger roof, and for Indian buyers, that's a really big attraction. So don't be surprised if you see a lot of people buying the Creta purely because it has a panoramic sunroof. I don't understand the practical aspect of it, but I can see why it's so desirable for so many people. The three things that I like about the Creta, which I think is a really big plus for the car. One, it offers electronic parking brake, which if you have an automatic model means that you can keep the car parked in stop-start traffic without having your foot on the brake pedal all the while. Once you get used to driving that, you really miss it on other automatic cars which don't have an electronic parking brake. Second thing I like, well, thankfully it has a conventional volume dial. I know most of us now use steering controls for changing the audio volume, but for us, people who started driving when steering controls at least didn't exist in the cars we could afford, a physical dial is still a must-have. So that's the one thing I miss on the Seltos, a physical volume dial. And the third thing I miss in the Seltos, and I think I've said that ad infinitum, is that on the automatic models of the Creta, you get steering wheel paddle shifters, which for control, especially if you're driving the 1.4 turbo engine, is great. The gearbox shifts well, and that for me are the three things that are the biggest factors. That's an advantage where the Creta has over the Seltos. Now I've told you the material and the design differences between the Seltos and the Creta. You know, effectively if you look at it, both Hyundai and Kia are part of the same group, the Hyundai Motor Group, and both are immensely successful brands worldwide. In fact, if I'm not wrong, the Hyundai Motor Group is now the 4th or the 5th largest automotive manufacturer in the world. So obviously both brands also have a very distinct identity. So essentially the differences between the two cars that you look at visually, inside and outside, and how they're positioned is because of what Kia projects itself and what Hyundai projects itself. And that is also quite evident when you drive them. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of the engines and the gearboxes. To give you a brief synopsis, the 1.4 petrol turbo is my absolute favorite, 138 bhp, 242 Nm of torque. That 7-speed DCT works really well. It's quick, it's fun to drive, and that holds true for both the Seltos and the Creta. The 1.5 diesel, 113 bhp, 6-speed torque converter, great for in-city, great for highway, very efficient, very comfortable, and the NVH levels also on both cars are very well controlled. So what are the differences? Well, the minute you get into the Kia, you get this sort of sporty feeling when you start driving it. The steering is quite direct, has a decent amount of feel. It darts in really well. But what stands out really is the fact that the Seltos is quite stiff in its setup, which is great when you're throwing it around. It's very eager, it's a very driver-friendly car. I really enjoy driving it, especially in the 1.4 turbo, like I said earlier. And you know, I could live with this every day. This would be a great car that I could drive to office every day and you know, just do a good commute. And once when the roads are empty like they are now, I could even throw it around and have a lot of fun. There are of course a couple of drawbacks. One, every time I sit in a Seltos, I just feel like the seat is, the driver's seat that is a little too high, and I feel like I'm sitting on top of the car. So maybe the driver's seat could have been a little lower. That would have sort of improved my feel. Also, I miss out on the two things. I think I've said that a million times before, but I'll repeat it quickly for reference. One, I really would like a physical volume knob on the stereo system. For me, that takes away a little bit of the appeal. Two, when you're pushing around, then the steering mounted paddle shifters are a great addition. Other than that, you know, last year when I drove the Seltos for the first time, I said this is the new segment benchmark, and I think that still holds true. If you're looking for a driver's car in this segment, the Seltos is still the benchmark. How's the Creta to drive against the Seltos? Well, I'm going to get in it in a couple of minutes and let you know right away. Now, when it comes to brand positioning, Kia is of course positioning itself in India as sort of more driver focused, more owner focused, whereas Hyundai is aiming more towards premium luxury. So after the Seltos, when I step into the Creta, you can see how the Creta sort of aimed more towards the typical Indian premium luxury customer, as they say it. That's a cut above a regular affordable car manufacturer, a mass market car manufacturer. And in that way, that's what Hyundai does. They load their cars with virtually every feature, with features that cars 2, 3, 4 times the price don't have. And that's a small sort of superiority that the Creta has over the Seltos, with the additional bigger sunroof, with the paddles, with the electronic parking brake. So that is of course a fact. But the other thing also is, given how Hyundai is aiming their product vis-a-vis their brand, is that the Creta feels decidedly softer to drive versus the Seltos. When I mean softer, it's not a bad thing. It's just that the Creta is more compliant on our bad broken roads. The ride comfort is slightly better. So that is a great compromise, because you feel a little more comfortable inside the car. However, when you start throwing the car around, like you would aggressively drive a Seltos, you can see that the body roll is a little higher, the steering a little bit lazy, or rather a little bit less response. And the one thing in the Creta that sort of annoys me is that on the 1.4 petrol motor, when you're trying to take a turn and accelerate fast out of it, there's quite a bit of torque steer. Yes, the torque steer is there on the Seltos also, but the Creta has a little too much, which can be quite annoying. Other than that, I think basically that defines the differences between the Seltos and the Creta. If you're looking for a pure driver's car, if you're looking for an SUV that you're trying to push, especially with the 1.4 motor, even with the diesel for that instance, the Seltos is slightly better tied down. The stiffer suspension really sort of makes it more eager to drive. But if you're like a typical customer, if you're like a customer looking for, a decent commute, a comfortable car, excellent NVH, then the Creta stands out because the slightly softer suspension, a little bit more body roll, a little bit more body movement on our bad road translates to a little more comfort. So that for me are the two biggest factors when the driving appeal of the cars is concerned. If you're looking for a driver's car, look at the Seltos. If you're looking for a more regular commute, more luxury, a little more comfort, look at the Creta. However, the million-dollar question still remains. Which of the two is the best car? Well, for me, that's like asking a parent, which of the two kids is their favorite. It's impossible to choose between the two. They're staggeringly good. So it boils down to two very simple factors that you should consider in your purchase. One, of course, is the design. That's a very subjective thing, and you'll like either of the two. Two, I think, boils down to how the car feels when you're driving it. If you're looking for driving appeal, if you're looking for driving excitement, if that's your main thing and you can live with a slightly stiffer suspension, the Seltos would be my choice. But if you're looking for proper luxury, if you're looking for the kind of conventional luxury, more comfort, better ride comfort, then the Creta. And ultimately, my main takeaway of the comparison is that whichever you buy, you literally can't go wrong with it. And that, as a customer, is as good as it gets.